In this chapter, we're going to have a look at a few more basic user interface components that come with KendoReact. We've already handled buttons in the last chapter, so now we'll see how to add different kinds of inputs and dropdowns to our forms, and we'll also convert our detail page interface to use a tabbed layout. We'll also complete the dashboard filtering requirement by adding a combo box for assignee selection. Just like we did in the last chapter, we're going to be referring to the documentation on the KendoReact website. So make sure you have that open and handy because we're going to be doing some exercises there as well. And we're going to start off with inputs next.
And we're going to start off with inputs next.
Head over to telerik.com, and in the KendoReact documentation, under components, you're going to find the inputs overview. Remember, inputs here is referring to the package name, and the package has a bunch of other components inside of it, including input. We're going to be using the input component to replace some existing fields and make them more useful. I already have the app running on localhost port 3000, and next to it, I have the finished version running on port 3001. You can run both at the same time so you can compare the two. If you head over to the backlog page and then click on Add, this is the form that adds a new item to our backlog. I want to use a KendoReact input for this title text box. If we go to the finished project and click on Add, this is the Kendo text box. You'll also notice it has a placeholder inside of it that says Enter Title. So let's start with that. According to the docs, under Getting Started, you're going to need the Progress KendoReact Inputs package, and you're going to need to install that. So let's copy that and head over to our project. Now it's running right now, so let's terminate it by pressing Control-C here and running that npm install command. Now, while that's installing, I'm going to ask you to feel free to pause the video now and try implementing this yourself. You've already seen the buttons example, so this is a good opportunity for you to get ahead and try this out and come back when you're ready. All right, hopefully you tried that. Let's walk through how to do this. I'll restart the server with npm run dev because we already have the package installed. You can check package.json, and there it is, KendoReact inputs. Let's hop back to the docs for a moment, and you'll see the next step is importing the components. So wherever you want to use the component from this package, whether it's input or masked text box or radio button or any of these other ones, you're going to import it using this statement. And we already have the global import in app.tsx for our theme, so we don't need to the second line. But if you're just adding this to a single page somewhere deep inside your app and you don't want to use the Kendo theme globally, then you can use these two imports in the same place. To see an example here in the docs, you can go to Overview, and then you'll see the samples implemented. Here's a text box, and if you take a look at View Source, you'll see a big import section. Here we're importing all the components from the KendoReact inputs package, and further down you'll see the components being used. Here is the text box, for example. Let's look at Input Overview, and there's the input. Here's a more zoomed in example of how to use the input. You're going to import input from KendoReact inputs, and then you're going to use it just like this. This also lists a bunch of other options you can use with it. So let's add this to our form. Back in the code, let's open up Source, Modules, and then we're on the backlog area, Components, Add Item Modal, and here's the Add Item Modal TSX file, which has our form to add a new item. If we scroll down a little bit, you'll see here's our HTML input for the title. It's using Bootstrap styling right now. We're going to replace this with the Kendo input. Now, since input is a pretty generic term, make sure you're importing the correct input, and we want this one, Progress KendoReact Inputs. So let's click on that. And just to make sure, I'd like to go back up and verify that that is in fact the one we're importing, and it is, so that's good. We no longer need the Bootstrap style class, so let's remove that, but we can keep everything else. So let's have a look. And there is our new input. It's hard to tell the difference, right? But if we take a look at F12 and inspect that element, you will see a bunch of Kendo classes on that input. It does get rendered as an HTML input with extra styling. So right now, this input is the Kendo input, and you'll see that when I focus inside that element, it does get the default Kendo styling. It's a little hard to tell with the default theme. We'll see more of a stark difference later in the theming chapter. For the description, I'm going to use the KendoReact text area component. Let's hop over to the documentation, and you'll see that, yes, text area is one of the things we can use in the inputs package. And here's an example of text area. If we take a look at the source code, import text area from KendoReact inputs, And here it is inside the form. All right, let's go back here to our project. And instead of the text area, that's the HTML text area, we're going to use the component text area from KendoReact inputs, this one. And this one has a closing tag, so let's replace that one as well. Good. We also do not need the Bootstrap class name again. Let's remove that, and we should be good to go. Let's take a look. Open up the form. And now our description field is also a Kendo component. Now our final project has a placeholder, so let's add that to our components. It's pretty simple using these KendoReact components because a lot of the attributes you can add to them are pretty much the same as the ones you would add to an HTML element. Here the placeholder is going to be enter title, and here the placeholder is going to be enter description. There they are. Let's make sure this works. I'm going to say item 1, description 1, and save our item. And sure enough, there it is. Item 1 and description 1. This is the new item we just created. As a final exercise in this lesson, I'd like you to convert the item type dropdown to a Kendo dropdown list. We'll cover this more in the next lesson, but try this on your own first. And let me show you where it is in the documentation. This is going to be a separate component package called Dropdowns. But you already know how to install packages and how to use components inside there. So here's the dropdown list that you're going to be using. And it's going to look something like this. Once you give this a shot, come back here and continue the course. And we'll add some dropdowns to the details form. That's going to be if you click on an item, and you'll see the details form here. And by the way, on the item details page, you'll also see several form fields, including a text box and a text area. We've already converted the inputs, so we're not going to do that. But we will convert the item type, the status, the priority, the estimate to Kendo components. In this lesson, we'll switch over to the item details form, where I've already updated the title and the description fields to use KendoReact components, just like we did in the add item form. You can find that in the code under backlog, components, item form, the item form, and then scroll down to where we have the title input and the description text area. These are now Kendo components that I've imported at the top, similar to how we did in the previous lessons. Now I'd like to change the HTML selects that are here, and these selects are used for item type, status, and priority. If you want to go ahead, try this out on your own first. And let me show you the goal of what we're trying to get to in the finished application. In the completed form, we have the Kendo text boxes, and we also have the item type, status, and priority fields rendered as Kendo dropdown lists. Some of these include icons, and others include Bootstrap badges, and some are just plain text. I recommend starting with the status since it's the simplest and doesn't require a custom render function. Try that out now and come back when you're ready. All right, let's walk through the implementation in our current app. Just like before, we're going to start out with the docs. So let's go to the dropdowns and then dropdown list overview. If you take a look at the source here, you'll see that this is actually coming from Progress KendoReact dropdowns. We do not have that package installed yet, so that's the first step. Back in the code, I'm going to terminate the running process and run this command, npm install at Progress KendoReact dropdowns. By the way, --save just specifies that you want to actually write this to our package.json file as a runtime dependency. This is an optional flag. All right, let's install that. And after this is installed, you'll have components like autocomplete, ComboBox, DropdownList, multi-select, and so on. For now, we'll only use the dropdown list, and we'll explore the ComboBox later in the chapter. Let's go to the top here, and we'll import the component manually. I'll show you a different way of importing. So this is the way I prefer to do it. I just say import, and then parentheses from, and look at that. I have Copilot turned on, so it's definitely helping me out. But if I didn't, I would just type in at progress/KendoReact dropdowns. And then once my file has that reference, I can go in here and just press Control Space to figure out what's available in this package. It'll bring up this little dialog where I can select anything I want. And you can actually discover all the different event handlers, properties, and components that are available. We're going to just import this component, the dropdown list, right now. So I'll select that, and let's go down to where we have our selects. This is the item type. We want to start with status, which is the easiest one to implement. And you'll see that we just have a regular HTML select here. And for the options, we're just iterating over this property called statusIsProvider and rendering an option for each value that's in that array. If we take a look at statusIsProvider, I'm just going to hit F12 here. You'll see that this is pulling in a constant, the item statuses. And if we look at that, you'll see we have submitted, open, closed, and reopened. So we're just looping over that and populating the options. And we're going to bind our new dropdown list to that same statuses provider. So I'm going to keep the select in place here and just add a dropdown list like that. We're going to need data, and that's going to be bound to statuses provider. The default value, and that's coming from item form status string, just like that. Notice that I could have just copied and pasted it from the select. It's the exact same attribute and value, so it's easy to just change this over. And same thing with the onChange event. In fact, I'm just going to copy it. Let's copy it from the select and paste it in here in our dropdown list. And we also need to give it a name. For now, I'm going to just use the same name, status. Let's have a look. We need to run this, of course, npm run dev. And now you'll see that we have two status fields here. One is our Kendo dropdown list, and the other one is our select. I just want to make sure that this does work and it does save. So I'm going to select submitted here and refresh the page, and it does. It actually submits the form just like it used to, and there we go. You might be wondering what this item form is, and that's just an object that is a model representing the form fields. The other thing you might be interested in here is how the form gets saved, and we're listening for the onChange event that's provided by the dropdown list, and then we're triggering this on non-text field change and passing in what was changed, the property that was changed. So if we take a look at that function, this is triggered immediately whenever a dropdown is changed, which updates the form and sends the update via the notify update item function that talks to the parent component, which is the page, and that talks to the services and the repository. All that stuff is already done for you. You don't need to worry about that when updating the UI. However, if you're implementing the dropdown list from scratch, you're going to need to have your own logic, of course, that handles the changes. Now we're just scratching the surface with the dropdown list. It is a pretty flexible component with many capabilities just by itself. There's a lot of examples in the documentation, like how to use virtualization, for example. See, there's a lot of items here. And if you render these in a select, that's going to really slow down your page. But if you're using a virtual list, well, that's going to help you out. So this component handles all that for you. There's filtering that you could do with it, something like that. Keyboard navigation, disable certain items. And of course, you can change the appearance of these items. Right now, we're just using a simple array of strings that we're binding it to. But in the next lessons, we'll explore how to bind objects and use custom rendering for drop-down items. To wrap up this lesson, let's head over to our code again, and we're going to remove the select. Now that we've replaced it successfully with the drop-down list, we can just get it out of the way. And let's have one last look. Here we go. There's the status field, and it's now a drop-down list instead of an HTML select. In the previous lesson, we implemented a simple status drop-down list bound to an array of strings. In this lesson, we'll take it a step further and update our priority HTML select to a drop-down list. And this time, we're going to use a custom render function to style each item. Here's the completed application, and this is the final result we're aiming for. Each priority will have a different color, and those colors are already available. I'll show you where you can get those. If you want to try this yourself, pause the video now and come back when you're done. Okay, now that you're back, let's find our priority select, and that's right here. This is going to be essentially the same kind of job as we did with the drop-down list for statuses, except our data is going to be bound to the priorities provider instead of statuses provider. Let's do that conversion now. This should be pretty simple. In fact, I'm just going to copy the statuses one and paste it right in to save a little bit of time. So there's our drop-down list. And instead of the statuses provider here, we're going to use the priorities provider from the priorities select. Let's copy that and paste it here. So there's our new priorities provider. The default value is going to be the same as our select. So we're going to copy that as well, which is bound to itemform.priorityString. And then the onChange handler is going to be pretty much the same. It's going to activate the on non-text field change, but instead of the status string property, we're going to pass in the priority string property. And of course, the name of this field is going to be priority instead of status. Okay, you've already done this before, so this is pretty simple. And the result you get is this. You just have a drop-down list bound to an array of strings. We can stop here, but let's add some visual styling to each item. In the documentation, under the drop-down list, you have a custom rendering section. And here's an example of rendering different icons we're going to use something similar to this. Let's take a look at the source code here. And if we scroll down to the dropdown list, you'll see that we have an item render property here. And that points to a function called item render. That's what we'll do too. Let's go back to the code. And in our dropdown list, right after data, we're going to say item render. Now we need to create a handler for this. And item render is going to receive a list item and props that are associated with that list item. We're going to take that and we're going to call our own function called priority render. And we'll pass in that list item and the props. Let's define this priority render function. And that's going to be in our code right over here. So function priority render, it's going to receive a list item and props. However, let's be a little more specific here. Let's call this item props. And while this can be typed as any, this won't give us any help if we try to use it. I'm going to actually disable Copilot. In this case, it's not giving us the suggestions we need. So item props can be actually typed properly so that we can get a list of properties off of that object. And the type is coming from our KendoReact package, the dropdown list package. So let's add that here in the imports. We're looking for list item props as the type. So now we're going to use that type here, and item props will reveal what properties are available on it. This is very helpful for API discovery when you're just starting out with this. The priority render function is triggered for every item in the list. It's going to be passed in a React element and the data item that this is bound to. To get a hold of the data item, we're using item props and data item. Let's just save that off so we have access to it. And since this function is triggered for every single row in the dropdown list, this is our opportunity to overwrite that with our own TSX. So we can construct a brand new TSX node. Let's call this one priority row. And just as a test, let's return a span. And inside the span, all we're going to have is that data item, which happens to be the string that we're looking for. So the priority, low, medium, high, or critical. Now we can't just return that. What we need to do is actually use React clone element. Now we can't just return that. We need to apply all the properties to the original list item. We're going to pass in li props and then our new priority row. This is not the most intuitive line, but you do have to remember to make a clone of the element. All right, let's take a look. Our result should actually be exactly the same. And yes, there we go. We have low, medium, high, and critical here. And now we're using a custom render function, even though all we're rendering are just spans. So the next step is to actually apply the colors that we want here. And to do that, let's start off by adding a class to this span. And we're going to use the Bootstrap badge class just to see how that changes the look. So we see a difference here. And there we go. Now we see that the badge class is being applied, even though the colors are off, but you see that the styling is completely different than, let's say, the default drop-down list handling, the default drop-down list rendering with strings. How do we get our colors up in there? How do we get our colors there though? Here we'll extend the badge class with our own class. And this is already written for you in a helper function called getIndicatorClass based on priority. In a helper function called getIndicatorClass, let's pass in the data item here. And if we take a look at that function, you'll see that that takes in a priority and returns a class name based on the priority. Pretty simple. And these classes are already defined in our CSS. So here we're just concatenating Bootstrap's badge with the class name from that function to get the correct badge color for our priorities. There's another drop down here for the item type. Now that we've seen how this works, try building this out on your own, and this should have icons in it, just like this. Pause the video and give it a shot. All right, now that you're back, let's implement this together. Back in the code, here is our item type selector. And we'll do this pretty quickly because you've done this a few times already. I'm just going to copy the statuses provider, paste it here right above the item type select. We're going to use the item types provider for the data. The default value is going to be type string. And we're going to pass in type string into our non-text field change handler. And of course, the name should be item type as well. Now you should know by now that we're using a custom renderer here. So we're going to use this item render property, and we're going to trigger the item type render function. Let's define that right over here in the code, right before the priority render. So it's going to be function item type render. This is also going to receive a list item and item props, which is of type list item props. And you already know what to do. Let's copy all this right here from the priority render function, so we don't have to type this multiple times. I like saving time just as much as any other developer by copying and pasting. So we've pulled out the data item from the item props. We're going to be creating a new item type row, and then we're going to be cloning the original list item with the properties and applying the item type row. Now, inside is where the magic happens. This is going to be our template that we're going to render. So first of all, we're going to need the data item, which is the name of the item type, for example, bug, or backlog item, or task, or chore, or impediment. But then we also want an image, an icon, and we want that icon to be right in front of the string. So that's going to be an image with a source and then a special class name that we've already predefined in our CSS, and that's backlog icon. Now there's a couple of problems with this. First of all, in React, you can't just have two elements. You're going to need to wrap them in a fragment. You can do it this way, or you can be more explicit by saying React, and you can be explicit about it and say react.fragment. That's going to be so now we don't have complaints about structure, but we do have a complaint about the image source, which we need to fill out. Where do we get the image for each icon? Well, you have to have a little bit of domain knowledge here, and I do, so I'm going to show you. Item type is a class that has these item type constants on it: bug, PBI, chore, impediment. But it also has this function: image res from type. So here we pass in the item type, and it gives us a string based on the item type of where that image is stored in our assets. Almost feels like cheating. So let's use that item type, image res from type, and the type is actually the data item in this case. So let's pass in the data item. Okay, let's have a quick look here at our application, and there's item type, and there are the icons that we want. So now we have item types rendered with icons in the dropdown. All we need to do is go back here and remove the selects that we're no longer needing. So let's remove this select, and let's remove the priority select as well, just to clean things up a little bit. There we go. By the way, many KendoReact components offer this kind of flexibility with rendering templates. We've explored the drop-down list in this lesson, and we'll take a look at the ComboBox and its rendering capabilities. We're pretty much done with our detail form. You can also go through and change some of the other buttons and lines to use the labels and Kendo buttons, but I will leave that as an exercise for you. In fact, if you take a look at the completed application and you take a look at the assignee modal and the add item modal, these are actually KendoReact components now, along with these buttons and the modal dialog, so you can see how that's done in the finished application. Now back on the details form, we need to convert this button interface for changing these pages to use a tabbed interface. And we will use the tab strip component to accomplish that. In the documentation, there is no tab strip component group or package, but there is a layout package, and this is where you will find a few different layout components, including tab strip. There's app bar, avatar, bottom navigation, grid layout, all sorts of things here, and there's tab strip right there. If we take a look at the example, you'll see a few different things you can do with tab strip. We just need a very simple one. The installation is pretty straightforward. Let's go to the getting started here under layout, and all we need to do is install the layout package. So let's copy that, go back to our code, terminate the running app, and run the installation. Once that's installed, npm run dev one more time. And I'm going to go into the code and navigate to where we have the detail page. You'll find that under backlog modules, pages, detail page right here. Right at the top, we're going to import from the new package that we just installed, layout, and this is going to be the tab strip. Now let's go down to the render function, and here you will see our button interface that switches between form, tasks, and chit chat. We're going to replace all of this with a tab strip. Let's delete this whole container with the buttons. So now all we have is this screen render call, which is going to render our detail screen. And right now we don't have these buttons anymore, but we do have the default screen being rendered, which is the form. So right here is where that form is being rendered, or whatever the screen that's selected is being rendered. We don't need that either anymore. So now we're just going to have a tab strip in here. The tab strip needs two properties. One is onSelect. In other words, what happens when we tap on one of these? And that's going to call the onTabSelect function. And the other one is going to indicate which is the selected tab right now. So here we're going to have another function call getSelectedTabNumber. We don't have either one of these implemented yet. So let's go back up here to the code of the function, and you'll see that we do have this onScreenSelected function that used to be called. This is the handler when we had the old buttons. So right under here, we're going to create the new function called onTabSelect. This is going to get our event args, and the new screen that we're requesting that we've just tapped on is going to be a number. So e.selected is going to be the index of the tab that we just tapped on. We need to somehow figure out how to convert that to detail screen type. Detail screen type is one of these: form, tasks, or chit chat. So we need to convert that, and we have a handy little map here. This map right here is called screen position map. And if we index into that, we'll get either form, tasks, or chit chat. So let's use that map here in our handler. Screen position map, we're going to index into it like an array, where it's actually an object with keys. And we're going to cast that to detail screen type, making our new screen be a detail screen type. Then we're going to call setSelectedDetailScreen to update the state of the component with the new screen. I'm going to leave this function in here. It's not being used. That's the old function, but I'll just leave that for reference. Next, we have this, getSelectedTabNumber. Let's implement that as well. Let's go up here, right under the new function that we just created. I'm going to create a new function called getSelectedTabNum. So this is just going to return to us screen position map. And again, we're going to index into it, but this time we're going to go the other way. So we're going to pass in this selected detail screen from our state, and we're going to pass it in as a number. And the reason we're doing all this is because our previous methods used strings, but here the tab strip references the tabs by number, by ID. So that's why we're doing the conversion each way we're going. All right, now a tab strip is not going to look like much by itself. In fact, it doesn't even render. We need tabs, and they're going to be child components of the tab strip. So tab strip tab is what we need, coming from progress KendoReact layout. And if I select that in VS Code, it'll automatically do the import for me from the correct place. But let's just go up here to verify to make sure that both tab strip and tab strip tab are components that are coming from KendoReact layout package. Back down here, tab strip tab. Let's give it a title. We're going to give this one the title form. All right, now if we take a look, we do have something here, and there is our tab strip. It's taking up the width of the page, and we have one tab in there, form. We need three tabs, form, then we need tasks, and finally chit chat. Now if we go back here, you'll see we have a tab strip with three tabs, and I can switch between these. Very nice. Now we just need to fill in the content. And whatever content you put inside each tab is going to be the content that shows up. So let's just say we have hello in here. You know what? Let's do form here, tasks here, chit chat here. So now we have the content, and the content is just any HTML. Not sure why chit chat is not showing up there, but I think you get the idea. Now previously, our buttons were rendering the components. So if we go up here to our old function called screen render, you'll see that based on the detail screen type that we selected, we returned a different component. So all we need to do now is just take this TSX and copy and paste it into the appropriate tabs. So the item form component is our form. Let's go ahead and paste that in here. Then we also have the tasks component. Let's paste that into our tasks tab, just like that. And finally, our chit chat component can be pasted into the chit chat tab, just like that. Okay, let's have a look. There's the form. It seems to just work. We have tasks and we have chit chat. Now you'll notice that tasks is working, but chit chat tab is giving us a little bit of a problem again. And that's because the indexing is in order. So it has to be that the first tab strip tab is 0 indexed, then 1, and then 2. And if we take a look at our map, our screen position map, chit chat is an index of 3. So we're going to change it to 2 here because that's the next one in line. I had it in here as 3 because the completed project has another tab that we're going to go into later, and that's the schedule tab. That's going to be 2 later, but we'll change it back later on. So if we change chit chat to 2, then we should be good to go. And now our tab is working, and now all our tabs are working. But you'll notice that we've lost the ability to navigate and keep track of what tab we're on in the URL. If we switch the tabs, it's not reflected in the URL. However, we do have the ability to drill in and deep link into each one of these tabs by going to the URL. So we want to be able to do that by selecting the tab as well and have it reflected in the URL. So now we just need to update our function that handles a screen select event or a tab select event, and we need to just augment it with some more information here. So we're going to be looking at the new screen and interrogating it a little bit here. If it's not equal to form, notice we get IntelliSense here because these are types and not just strings. So that's handy. So if new screen is not form, then we're simply going to navigate to detail. Then we're going to pull out the item ID / whatever that new screen is. So we're going to pop that onto the navigation stack. And the reason we're ignoring form is because form is the default. So if it is form, we don't want that in the URL. We're just going to navigate to detail / item ID. That's it. All right, let's check this out. Now I'm going to refresh this just in case. And if I go to tasks, yep, there it is, tasks in the URL. Chit chat, it's reflected in the URL. Perfect. So everything's working. And if we go to form, it's not going to go to 5/form. It's just going to go to the detail / item ID. Looks like we've fulfilled the requirements to use the tabbed interface for the detail page. Next, let's go back to the dashboard, and we're going to add a combo box here to do further filtering. So far, we've seen a number of very useful and pretty simple components. There's one more that's especially useful and applicable in many scenarios, the combo box. In the documentation under Dropdowns, we also have a combo box component here. We already installed this package. Includes a bunch of other components like autocomplete, DropdownList, multi-select. Combo box is just one of them. What's nice about this component is that it allows you to do the filtering. So for example, if I enter BAS, but if I enter K after that, you'll see that the second item is selected. And if I go to V, then there's a highlight around volleyball. But I can also enter text that's not in the selection, and I can also clear this. So I can use this in multiple different ways. It's a nice little component. And we're going to use this component as a filtering option on the dashboard right next to our months. If we look at the completed application here on the dashboard, you'll see that the months work as expected, but also we have the ability to filter by user. So if we select Emily Harris, for example, Emily is not doing much work here in the last 3 months. So 2 active issues, 2 open issues. And if we clear out Emily, now we're back to 105 issues for the last 6 months. Now here's your opportunity to try this out yourself. You already have the documentation and experience from previous dropdowns. Go ahead, try this, and come back when you're done. All right, now we can do this together. Let's close any open files that we have, and we're going to go back to the dashboard module, pages, and then dashboard page. Let's open that up. This is where our button group is that filters by months. And the combo box is going to go right before these. I'm actually going to wrap the combo box in a div, kind of like we did here with the button groups. So I'll use that same exact div and the styling from Bootstrap. And then I'll add a combo box right here. Make sure it's coming from KendoReact Dropdowns package. And there we go. Just like the dropdown list, the combo box uses a data attribute, and we'll bind this to the list of users. Let's take a look at where that's coming from. And here is the list of users in our state, but currently it's just an empty array, so we're going to get nothing in our dropdown. However, if we go to the app, you should already see a combo box, and you can do the layout and fix things up if you need to, but you'll see that there's no data yet. We already have a service called user service in this component. It's currently not being used, and user service will provide us with the users. Now this might feel like a black box to you because you don't know the inner workings of this app, but that's not something for you to worry about. You can always look at how it's implemented in the code, these implementation details aren't critical for using KendoReact. Just make sure user service is available here. We're also going to need a reference to the store here because that's where our users are going to be locally cached in our global state of the application. And in this app, we're using a reactjs observable for that. Again, another implementation detail we don't need to worry ourselves about because we're focused on KendoReact here. So from the store, we're selecting the users and we're registering users observable to that users. In other words, whenever we load the users, observable is going to be notified. We're subscribed to that so that whenever that changes, our local users state will be updated by using set users. And the reason we're doing it this way is because we want to lazy load these users. If we just go to this dashboard page, we don't have the users loaded right now. And that's because if we don't need something, why load it? Why waste system resources, right? So that's one way to lazily load the users is only load them when the dropdown is activated. Either the dropdown is activated or the ComboBox is interacted with by typing in there. So the ComboBox has a special event for that. Let's go back to the ComboBox and we're going to add that event. It's called onOpen. And we're going to create a function called userFilterOpen. So let's go up in the code and we're going to implement that function right here, userFilterOpen. And if we're not subscribed yet to that observable, here we're going to call subscribe. And anytime that observable changes, we're going to get a list of users, which is of type user array. And once we receive those users, just do a quick check here. If the length of that array is more than 0, then we're going to act on it. And then we're going to change the state of this component and set the users to the list of users. So now we made sure we are subscribed to any changes that might happen. But here's the key. We're going to use that user service that's registered up above in the component, and we're going to call the fetch users function. And at that point, we just call the function and we don't care what happens. We don't need to listen to the results because once fetch users function gets called, it talks to the API and then it populates. And whenever that returns, it just populates the global application store, which will automatically let us know that we've loaded the users and that we load the local user state. I know it's a bit much, but like I said, we don't need to care about that. We just need to make sure that we're triggering this on open whenever that ComboBox opens up. And now if we go back to the application and we take a look and we open up that dropdown from the ComboBox, you'll see that we have a bunch of objects here. This is great because now we see that we are loading those on demand, lazily loading those objects. And those objects happen to be users. We're just not displaying them properly. But first, let's widen the ComboBox a little bit because it seems a little bit narrow. So we're going to add a style attribute here and we're going to set the width to 250. And yeah, that made it a little bit wider so that even longer names can fit in there. And next we need to tell the ComboBox which fields of the objects to display. So instead of object, we want to show something. We want to show the text field, and that's going to be the full name property. Remember, we're getting back PT user types. If we take a look at that, we'll see that PT user common. PT user is made up of P object base intersected with PT user common, and we have a full name as one of the properties there. So that's what we want to show here. Full name. And then to differentiate the data items, we're going to use a data item key, which is going to be the ID of each one of those users. Make sure these property names are spelled exactly right. These are string values that we're passing in and not strongly typed, so we need to make sure they're spelled correctly. Now the ComboBox shows the names of the people, the users, or the assignees that we're going to filter by. And if we select one of these, the actual ID of that user is sent behind the scenes. We're not seeing a result of that yet because we need to implement the onChange event, which is another event that the ComboBox provides. So along with onOpen, we get the onChange event. Let's call that userFilterValueChange. And let's go back to the code and we're going to create another function called userFilterValueChange. This one is going to get args, and this is typed as ComboBox change event. Now we can pull out the actual user from the target of the event and the value. And then we can just set the selected user to the user. But we don't have a selected user in our state yet. we need to keep track of that. So let's create a new state item that's going to be selected user, and then a set selected user corresponding function. We're going to use state from React, and it's going to be of type ptuser or null. And I'll show you why that's important in a moment. And we're going to initiate that to null as well. So now we're setting the selected user, and let's see what we have. I'm going to select one of them, and nothing happens still. That's because the ComboBox doesn't realize that we have a selected user. So besides data, we also have a value property that we need to fill in, and that's going to be that selected user. That's the current state. Now we need to do one more thing here, and that's besides setting the selected user, we also need to reset that filter. So let's set the filter, and we're going to pass in the current filter values as well as the new user ID, which is going to be user.id. So now our filter is going to actually listen to not only these months, but also the user dropdown. And there we go. Now we see that our user ID is being passed to the filter just fine. And if I clear this out, well, that didn't work. We're missing one important thing here, and that's to account for the fact that you can clear out that combo box. And that's why we set that state option to null, is because user can be null here. If the combo box is cleared, we want to make sure we account for that. So if user, then we set the selected user to user, but if user is null, then we want to handle that slightly differently. So we're going to take these two lines, copy them here, and we're going to pass in selected user being null here, just to be more explicit about it. And user ID is going to be undefined. All right, let's check this out. We're going to select the user, me, and then clear that out, and we're back to all the issues. So now the user filter is working and the month filters are working, and they're all working together. But how do we get user images in here? We'll tackle that next. Let's take a look at the completed application, and you'll see that there are images next to each of the users in the combo box. This allows us to easily select a user just by seeing their picture. The Kendo combo box supports any kind of template you throw at it, which is really powerful. The implementation is very similar to what we did with the dropdown list using custom rendering. You can find that under Dropdowns, ComboBox, and then the custom rendering section. Try using the documentation along with the code we've written so far to implement user avatars inside the combo box. You can try this on your own, and when you're done, come back here and we'll do it together. All right, let's do this together now. We already have a combo box component here, and we're just going to use its item render event. Let's call it filter item render. Since we don't have that implemented yet, let's go up here to the code, and I'll add it right over here, filter item render. This is going to take in a list item, which just like in the dropdown is the actual TSX node. Then the item props, we'll do this type any. Then the item props is going to have our data item on it. We're going to cast that as a puser. Each object is going to be a puser type. And let's save that off as a user item. Now we're going to need to create some TSX to return, and we'll call that rendered row. So it's going to be a div here with a class name. This is just going to be some bootstrap styling. We're going to need to have a column for the avatar and another column for the name. Let's use some bootstrap styling here as well. Call auto for the name. It's going to have a span inside of it, and we're going to use user item dot full name. We'll come back to the avatar shortly, and make sure you do this the exact same way you did before with the drop-down list custom rendering. We're going to use clone element from React, pass in the list item, pass in the props, and then our rendered row. This should look pretty much the same as it did before. Yep, it does. These are now spans though, and we're returning this entire block of HTML. We're rendering this HTML, I should say. Now we need some avatars in here. First, I'm going to apply a class name here for another column, and then we're going to have an image. I already have a few class names predefined. List item avatar, rounded. We're going to have an alt tag that says avatar. And finally, we need a source. Now here, the user item also has the source for the avatar, and it's already part of it, so you don't need to dig it up anywhere. Let's take a look now. Great. Now we have users displaying with their avatars and names. Filtering still works, and this completes our dashboard filters.